What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 298. It's a fantastic card. Every single one of these fights is really interesting from a betting point of view, and I hope that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. And I'm also really looking forward to live betting this weekend's card. As many of you know, live betting on the UFC is my bread and butter, is what I do best. So I'd love it if some of you could come into my live betting group for this weekend and join me. Hopefully we can make some cash. So I want to give away some free trials. And right now might be a really good chance to get in on my live betting service, because as we know, in most things in life, betting included, everything is cyclical. You have these good times, you have bad times. In sports betting, you can't win all the time. You have dips every once in a while. It's inevitable. That's just the way it is. Now, if you look at my profitability chart on live betting, you can see that since I started tracking my results 8 years ago, for the most part, we've just been grinding out non-stop profits over the last 8 years. We've done really well. Like I say, live betting on the UFC is my speciality. But what always happens after every good winning run, you always hit like a flat period or a dip, period of time where you don't perform particularly well. We had one, here. We had definitely one here. This was probably my worst run ever, where we floated around break even for quite a few months. Same again here. A couple of years later, nice flat period. Well, then we had a dip in the summer of 2022. And actually, over the last few months, I haven't been performing well either. You can see we're currently in the middle of a bit of a flat period. But what you'll notice about my profitability chart is after every dip, every flat period, we always go on these big winning runs. You see it here, you see it here, you see it here, and we also responded to this dip in 2022 pretty well also. But what tends to happen is, it's like a pattern that I've noticed over the last 8 years, so we have these nice winning runs and momentum builds, people start talking online about how well I'm doing, and then more and more people become interested in my live betting service. And then they tend to join, a while into the winning run, maybe a few months in, maybe towards the tail end, and then a lot of the time they will catch the dip that inevitably comes after. I suppose it's just like anything in life, right? No one wants to buy Bitcoin when it's at $100, but everyone wants to buy Bitcoin when it's at 50 grand, right? It's one of those things where people are often late to the party. So I thought we'll give away some free trials to my live betting service now, because in every other dip I've ever had in the past, I've always bounced back with a huge winning run, and I'd expect that to happen this time as well, probably over the next few months. So leading into the summer could be really good for us, so it's probably a good time to get in now. And so hopefully if you take advantage of the free trial, you might walk right into our next big winning run. And like I say, history shows that after every little dip, and this one's not particularly bad, we've had some really nasty ones in the past where we float around break even for a really long time, so might be a really good time to get in. So if you'd like a free trial to my live betting service to get you live betting with us this weekend at UFC 298, all you've got to do is send me an email, and then I will email you back with instructions on how I'll basically get you set up for the free trial. The live betting tips are broadcast through Discord, so I'll explain in the email how to get set up and join Discord, get access to it, all that kind of stuff. And my email address will be in the description below, info@mmabettingtips.com. Hope to see you there. Should be quite a lot of fun. The only thing that I will say is not everyone will be able to get into the free trial, only because the more people that place the same bets at the same time, the faster the odds decline. So I have to manage the number of people in the group. So I'll do it on a first come, first serve basis. But if you don't get in this time, don't worry about it. I'll keep a list. And then when spaces become available, I'll send you an email and we'll get you in on a future free trial. So still send me an email, and eventually everyone will get a trial. And I think you'll love it. Like you can see, we make a profit most of the time. So isn't going to cost you anything to give it a try. Check it out. So now Now let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about on this card. We'll take a deep dive into the main event between Alexander Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Volkanovski is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.80, which is going to be minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. We can see that Topuria is the underdog at average odds are around 2.05, which is going to be plus 105 for an implied probability of 49%. So, when I first saw the odds for this fight, I was shocked. I was really shocked because I didn't expect them to be in the even money odds range. I expected Volkanovski to be a pretty big favourite because the way I kind of looked at this was, you know, Volkanovski is considered to be one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world, and wasn't that long ago people were talking about him being potentially the greatest fighter of all time, the best pound for pound fighter in the world, and then, you know, he suffers a knockout loss in his last fight at the hands of Makhachev, and now all of a sudden a guy like Ilia Topuria, who's mostly unproven, you know, hasn't fought a particularly high level of opponent, all of a sudden now a guy that was recently considered to be the greatest fighter on earth is in the even money odds range against someone that's completely unproven, facing a huge step up in competition, and the odds are in the even money odds range. It just caught me by surprise. You know, a lot of people are very high on Volkanovski, and whenever I do breakdowns of Volkanovski's fights, it's clear that people like him a lot, and you know, to see Topuria in the even money odds range is quite shocking to me. So we'll break this one down, and I'd love to hear from you in the Discord or in the comments what you think about this fight. Do you agree with the odds? Do you not agree with the odds? Are you going to be betting it? I would love to know what you think, because this is an interesting fight. So let's start off by taking a look at the tail of the tape. So Volkanovski is 35 years old, 5'6", with a 71.5-inch reach. And Topuria is 27 years old, 5'7", with a 69-inch reach. So there are a couple of interesting X factors on this one. The first one's the age. We talk about age all the time. And at the end of the day, this is a young man's game. And I'm expecting this to be one of the main reasons why the odds are in the even money odds range, right? Volkanovski's even made that funny commercial where he's portraying himself to be like an old man. It's hilarious, right? You know, it's no secret that Volkanovski is getting old for a featherweight. At 35 years old, he is very old for a featherweight. The lighter weight classes, you know, are all about speed, reflexes and athleticism, and so fighters do tend to decline earlier in the lighter weight classes than they do in the heavier weight classes. So 35 years old is pretty old for a featherweight, and statistically the younger fighter wins around 67% of the time when there's an 8-year age gap in a fight. And at the end of the day, statistics are only as useful as they are, you know, being interpreted, right? Statistics can only be used effectively when interpreted correctly, and for me, this is one of those fights where that statistic is really meaningful, because at 35 years old, Volkanovski as a featherweight is at that stage in his career where he will be starting to decline from fight to fight, whereas Topuria at 27 years old hasn't even hit his prime yet. He should be getting a lot better from fight to fight. Now, has Volkanovski showed any signs of decline? That's the real question, right? Because as much as we know Father Time is undefeated and it's going to affect Volkanovski at some point, and there's no way for him to avoid declining, it's just an inevitability, some fighters do kind of cheat biology and decline later in their careers, right? Daniel Cormier, probably the best example I could think of. So is Volkanovski an outlier? Is Volkanovski going to be one of these guys that can still compete at the very highest level into his late 30s? Now, it's unlikely because he's in a lighter weight class. If he was in the light heavyweight, middleweight division, it would be more likely. But for me, Volkanovski hasn't really shown any any real signs of decline. His cardio is still excellent. He's still tough. He's still very sharp. His reflexes are still there. He's still very fast. He's still very athletic. For me, Volk still looks great. The only sign that we have that he may be declining, and this is inconclusive, it's just something that I've got to talk about based on what I've seen in the footage. The only thing that could be a clue that he is starting to decline is that he has been wobbled, dropped, or knocked out in his last 3 consecutive fights. So he was obviously brutally knocked out in his last fight against Islam Makhachev, and that's a discussion in itself. We were talking about this on the last card where we were breaking down Michael Johnson's fight, or almost said Michael Jackson then, Michael Johnson's fight against Mr. Flowers, where we were saying, you know, the knockout that Michael Johnson suffered against Carlos Diego Ferreira was potentially a career-changing knockout, and for a guy like Johnson to have to try and bounce back from that at 38 years old, it won't be easy. And the same thing applies to Volkanovski. He was brutally knocked out, you know, back in October. It was only 4 months ago. He's almost 36 years old. Is he going to be able to recover from a knockout like that? Will it affect his confidence, his durability? We don't know. But what we do know is that he has been rocked or dropped in his last 3. So he was also rocked by Yair Rodriguez. If you go back and watch the fight, I should have actually pulled it up in a clip, but it's too late now. But if you go back and watch that fight, a lot of people will miss Volkanovski getting rocked in this fight. But basically, Rodriguez is on the back foot on the outside being pressured by Volk. Volk comes forward. Rodriguez stings him, and you can see Volkanovski's legs go, but then Volk immediately shoots a takedown. So like, it's not super obvious that Volk has been wobbled, but he was definitely wobbled if you go back and watch the fight. But it was like a very split-second thing, and we know how tough Volk is. We know how good he is at recovering. So it's not super obvious unless you're watching, paying close attention. And then of course he was wobbled by Makhachev in their first fight as well. So when I talk about that being the first potential sign the Volk is declining, it's just because if you look at Volkanovski's career prior to the first time that he fought Makhachev, I don't recall him ever getting wobbled. Not even in his, you know, in the amount of time that he spent in the octagon with Holloway. Now, I know that Holloway's not a particularly huge power puncher, but still a very dangerous striker, still a very skilled striker. Yet, I don't ever recall Holloway really hurting Volk in that way. So, if you think about it, we didn't really see Volk get hurt on the feet in his entire UFC career. Then all of a sudden we've seen him get wobbled in his last 3. Is that a trend? Is that a sign that he's starting to decline? Or is it just coincidence? It's difficult to say. In his defense, Makhachev's obviously huge, right? He's a lot bigger than him. So, you know, it's going to be a lot easier for someone like Makhachev to rock him than someone like Holloway, who's a lot smaller. And Yair Rodriguez is a very dangerous striker. So it could just be a coincidence, but it's something worth thinking about. The other X factor that's worth thinking about on this fight is that both these guys are roughly the same size. 5'6" versus 5'7", 69-inch reach versus a 71.5-inch reach. That's quite notable to me because when you look at Volkanovski's record, for the most part, for a long time now, ever since he fought Jose Aldo, really, he's been facing guys who are a lot bigger than him or have longer wingspans. You know, Holloway longer and taller, Ortega longer and taller, Chan Sung Jung longer and taller. Same goes for Yair Rodriguez, and of course it goes for Islam Makhachev. So while we've talked a lot about the potential that Volkanovski has declined, we could also see Volk look absolutely incredible and better than ever this weekend, because usually when we see Volk, he's facing much larger opponents, whereas now he's going to be facing a guy of a similar size to him for the first time in a while. So he hasn't got to worry about getting inside a longer reach, hasn't got to worry about dealing with, you know, bigger opponents. That could really bring out the best in Volk. So even before we get into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's an interesting one. Something else that's interesting, I suppose, an X factor for us to talk about is the fact that Topuria looked absolutely fantastic in his last fight against Josh Emmett. He went hard for 5 rounds, didn't slow down at all. Even when he went really hard for the finish in round 4, he had Emmett hurt extremely bad, exerted loads of energy trying to take Emmett out. He did an adrenaline dump, which I thought was quite impressive. He still looked reasonably good in round 5. And this is interesting to me because if you go back and watch Topuria's fights earlier in his career, his cardio didn't look great. He did slow down quite a bit. Even in the Bryce Mitchell fight, which ended in round 2, just before he got the finish, he was looking pretty tired. Whereas his cardio looked absolutely phenomenal in the Emmett fight. But there may be reasons why his cardio looked different against Bryce Mitchell and Josh Emmett. And I suppose we could just get into it now. Actually, I was going to say we'll get into it in a bit. We may as well get into it now. So, what's very interesting about this matchup is when you look at footage of both these two guys, the odds being in the even money odds range make a lot of sense because there's not really anything you can pick out which suggests either of them has a particularly big advantage anywhere. They're very well matched. But what you very much notice about Ilia Topuria is that he is very good when he's the aggressor, when he's leading the dance. He's excellent. But when he's forced to fight on the back foot and react to what his opponent is doing, when you pressure him, he's nowhere near as effective. And you really notice this in his fight against Josh Emmett, where we know Emmett is a counter striker that likes to stay on the outside and react to what his opponent is doing. And so it was easy for Topuria to take control of the centre of the octagon and pressure Emmett on the outside. Then when Topuria faced Jay Herbert and Bryce Mitchell, he didn't look anywhere near as good on the feet because Mitchell was coming forward, forcing the action, trying to take him down. And with Jay Herbert being so much bigger than Topuria, 6'1" with a 77-inch reach versus 5'7" with a 69-inch reach, when Herbert put Topuria on the outside, he did look kind of sloppy and kind of vulnerable. Now, it's not going to feel great having someone as big as Herbert walking you down. It's a lot harder for someone like Topuria to get inside the 77-inch reach than it will be to get inside the 71-inch reach. But there's a notable difference to me in striking and striking defense when Topuria is leading the dance and when he's on the back foot. And again, you can say with Bryce Mitchell, you know, Mitchell's a lot smaller than Herbert, so Topuria shouldn't have been as uncomfortable as he was when pressured by Mitchell. But then obviously with Mitchell, you've got the threat of the takedown. So again, it's no surprise that Topuria's striking defense affected when he's got one eye on the potential takedown attempt from Mitchell, which he may not have to worry about with Volk, because Volk doesn't shoot many takedowns. But you guys get what I'm saying. The sport is very nuanced, it's very complex, and from what I've seen, Topuria is very effective on the front foot when he's leading the dance, nowhere near as effective when he's having to react to what his opponent is doing and under pressure. Now, this makes for a really interesting dynamic in this fight, because if we think about, you know, what this matchup looks like stylistically based on past performances, I believe they're both very well matched. Both are very good boxers. Topuria's got a lot more power in his hands. I think he's the more dangerous striker out of the two. Volk is much more of a volume striker. But I do think Volk is a more diverse striker. We've seen him do great work with leg kicks, where he kind of immobilized Max Holloway in their, I think it was their second fight. But Volk is the more dynamic striker. He mixes it up more. But Topuria is by far the better boxer, the more dangerous boxer. I think he lands the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots. Volk moves a lot better than Topuria. He's got great footwork and movement. But I do think Topuria is the more physically imposing fighter. Now, does that come at a cost? Will Topuria slow in this fight if it's contested at a high pace? That's possible. You know, that physicality, that power of Topuria could come at a cost. I think one of the things that makes Volk so great is his gas tank. But obviously he's not the most powerful, physically imposing guy because, you know, there's trade-offs, right? Guys that don't have that abundance of power and athleticism, physicality, power, they're more likely to have better cardio just because they don't burn through as much energy with the things they throw and the things they do. So in terms of how these two match up on the feet, I think Topuria is definitely the more dangerous, lands more hard, impactful shots, but Volk moves a lot better, mixes it up a lot better. There's no doubt about that, and of course there's no doubt about Volk's gas tank either. Now, in terms of how they match up when it comes to grappling, again, they're both very well matched. They both have good takedown defense. They're both very difficult to hold down. They're both very scrambly. They both actually don't try to take their opponents down very often either. Now, I would expect this to be a stand-up fight, just because the defensive wrestling of both guys is so good that I don't think either of them are going to waste time or energy trying to take the other down. They're probably not achieve very much in terms of they're probably going to be quite realistic in understanding that what's the point of burning through energy if they're not going to be able to take each other and hold each other down. I think we're going to get a stand-up fight here. However, if we are to see grappling in this fight, I think it's going to be Volkanovski doing the grappling, because his performance against Makhachev showed that he is an incredible MMA grappler, right? To be able to hang on the ground with an MMA grappler as good as Makhachev, when Makhachev had that kind of size advantage over him, it's kind of unbelievable that he was able to do that. He defied all probabilities. I certainly wasn't expecting that with the size difference. I thought Volk would get dominated on the ground, but he didn't. He held his own with Makhachev. Makhachev didn't really cause him major problems on the ground. Volk was relatively comfortable throughout that fight and obviously finished strong. But even though I don't think Volk has any kind of huge advantage over Topuria when it comes to grappling from a technical point of view, I think it would be smart for Volk to use a grappling heavy game plan in this fight, because I think it would be a great way of wearing Topuria down. You know, we've seen Topuria slow in the past. He was looking a bit tired in the Bryce Mitchell fight. And I think if Volk were to force Topuria to grapple a lot early on, even though he may not have much success with his grappling because it's not going to be easy to take Topuria down and hold him down when both guys are fresh, I think just forcing Topuria to grapple would tire him out to the point where his striking would become a lot less effective and the fight would become a lot easier for Volk. But Volk doesn't usually fight like that, so whether he will do that or not, I'm not so sure. Having said that, if you go back and watch Volk's fight against Yair Rodriguez, he did use a lot of grappling, but he didn't actually shoot many takedowns. So Volk had a lot of success with his grappling against Yair Rodriguez, but for the most part it was because Rodriguez was giving up cheap takedowns and then Volk was easily able to hold him down and dominate him from top position. Topuria is obviously going to be a lot more difficult to take down and hold down than Rodriguez is. So what I'm trying to say is we haven't really seen Volk ever use like a real persistent grappling heavy game plan where he's had to chain wrestle hard and really persist with the takedowns. That's what he's going to have to do to have success with grappling against Topuria, and because we've never seen him implement a game plan or strategy like that, it would be dangerous for us to assume that he's going to do it for the first time against Topuria, even though I think that would be the smartest game plan and his best path to victory. So if we bring this full circle now and we wrap this breakdown up and really talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, we've kind of explained the reasons why they're very well matched when it comes to striking and grappling. And what makes this a really interesting fight for me is that with Volkanovski being such a high level guy with, you know, just a high level of skills everywhere, what Volk does have coming into this fight is options. And what I really like about Volkanovski is that he comes into every fight with a game plan and strategy specifically tailored towards exploiting his opponent's weaknesses. And this is why, over the years, Volk has managed to beat so many different styles of opponents, because you never really know what you're going to get from him, right? You watch him in one performance against Max Holloway and he comes in with a very heavy boxing-based game plan. And then the next time he fights Max Holloway, he leg kicks Holloway to death. And then, you know what I mean? Like, when he fights Yair Rodriguez, he uses grappling. And you have all these different examples of performances where Volkanovski comes in and fights with a completely different game plan and strategy from what we've seen in the past, but it's specific to the guy he's facing. And what's interesting about that is, if we look at how both these two match up from a stylistic point of view, there's really no big advantage here, in my opinion, for either guy when it comes to striking or grappling. But when you look at Topuria, there are game plans and strategies that I think would be quite effective against him. And while we haven't necessarily seen Volkanovski use those game plans and strategies against past opponents, we do know that Volk is very good at strategizing and putting into practice game plans against guys where he uses the element of surprise to really expose and exploit their biggest weaknesses. And when I look at Topuria, we've seen two weaknesses in his skill set. The first is that he does slow down in fights. Earlier in the breakdown, we said that his cardio looked amazing against Josh Emmett, but he did slow down in previous matchups. I believe the reason why his cardio looked great against Josh Emmett was because Emmett decided to counter-strike Topuria, and so he allowed Topuria to dictate the pace of the fight. So if you go back and watch that matchup, literally from the first second to the last, Emmett is on the outside trying to counter Topuria with his big right hand. And Topuria is able to take control of the centre of the octagon and just use his boxing to chip away at Emmett and outstrike him. But when you are allowed to dictate the pace of the fight, you're not burning through anywhere near as much energy as if your opponent is taking the fight to you and you're being forced to react to what they're doing. So I think the reason why Topuria's cardio looked great against Emmett was because he was in total control. So he could, you know, keep his heart rate under control, control his breathing. He was very comfortable in there. When you see him kind of slow down a bit against Bryce Mitchell, and in some of his past fights, like against Youssef Zalal, for me, it was because Youssef Zalal and Bryce Mitchell made Topuria work much harder. He was forced to react to them. He was forced to defend takedowns. You know, he was pressured a little bit in those fights, which is things that Emmett didn't do. And so that's a potential path to victory for Volkanovski, where if he makes Topuria work really hard and put Topuria on the back foot, and if Volk dictates the pace, and if Volk forces Topuria to react to what he's doing, then Topuria is going to burn through way more energy than he did against Emmett and potentially struggle a lot more. Now, what are the best ways in which Volk can basically dictate the pace of the fight and make Topuria react to what he's doing? Well, the number one strategy is what we've already mentioned: grappling heavy game plan. Doesn't matter if you get the takedowns, doesn't matter if you have any success on the ground, it really doesn't matter. We know Volk is a cardio machine that can sprint for an unlimited number of rounds. I mean, we saw him in the first Makhachev fight. It's insane. So if Volkanovski just comes out, grapples hard in the first few rounds, makes Topuria work hard to defend takedowns, initiate these crazy grappling exchanges like we saw in the Makhachev fight, I do think that'll take it out of Topuria, and I do think he'll look very tired in the second half of the matchup. The problem is, like I've said, from a betting point of view, it's difficult for us to bet on Volk doing that because he's never really used a grappling heavy game plan before. You know, we've seen him shoot the odd takedown here and there like the Rodriguez fight, but we've never seen, you know, Volk come out and go full, you know, fucking Alexander Magomedovsky, right? We've never seen that kind of performance from him. So it's dangerous for us to assume he will do it this weekend. The second strategy that Volk could implement, which would be a lot more risky, would be to put it on Topuria on the feet and refuse to take a backward step. So your Nate Diaz, your prime Tony Ferguson, your prime Robbie Lawler type strategy, where you just come forward, you force Topuria to engage, you don't take a backward step, you put him on the back foot, and you force him to react to what you're doing. Basically what what Topuria did to Josh Emmett. Now again, that is a way more dangerous strategy than the grappling based strategy, because obviously Topuria is a very good boxer with big power in his hands, and when you use a pressure fighting style, you have to put yourself in danger because you stood right in front of your opponent, you're coming forward, which means you're wide open to counters. That's a very dangerous strategy to use against someone like Topuria, but can Volk do it? It's possible. Now, again, from a betting point of view, it is dangerous for us to bet on Volkanovski to implement that game plan and strategy, because that's not usually how Volk fights. If you go back and watch any of Volk's fights, or most of Volk's fights, for the most part, he likes to stand back and react to what his opponent is doing. He's not a pressure fighter. He does throw a high volume strikes, he works hard, but he's not a pressure fighter. And so, from a betting point of view, this fight's really, really complicated, because when you look at them skill for skill, they're extremely well matched, and the odds make a lot of sense with them being in that even money odds range. But you can pick out two game plans and strategies that would be very effective for Volk. The problem is, he's never used those game plans and strategies before. And if you've consumed my content for a really long time, if you watch my breakdowns every week, you will know that in every one of these breakdown videos, we talk about the easiest path to victory for each fighter and the game plans and strategies they should use. But as you know, every week we see situations where fighters do not use those game plans and strategies. You know, last week we were talking about how Bruna Brazil had a clear and obvious path to victory against Loma Lookboonmee, because she was a lot bigger than Lookboonmee and she had probably a big advantage on the ground. And we said, look, if Bruna Brazil stands and strikes with Loma, it's going to be a difficult fight for her. If she uses a grappling heavy game plan, she significantly increases her chances of winning. And what did Bruna Brazil do? She went out, tried to win a kickboxing match, didn't actually commit to a takedown until like the last minute of the fight, when she actually got it pretty easily. So that was a clear game plan and strategy for Bruna Brazil that she chose not to use. Now Volk's a lot better than Bruna Brazil. Wouldn't have got to where he is if he wasn't a smart fighter. But it is dangerous to trust fighters to use game plans and strategies to win fights when they've never used them before. So take from that what you will. But let me know on the Discord or in the comments below what you think about what I've said. If you think I've missed anything, if you think I'm wrong about anything, who you will be betting. This is a real interesting fight. I've been very tempted to bet Volkanovski, but for me, I just can't pick out any huge advantages for Volkanovski anywhere unless he uses those game plans and strategies that I spoke about. And for that reason, I'm going to pass on this one. But let's take a look at the over-under. Let me just refresh this as well to make sure we've got the latest odds, because I'm imagining we'll see a decent amount of odds movement this week. Do we have the over-under? We don't. That's very strange. Where are the odds on the over-under? Very, very strange. They're not there. Okay, let me see if I can get them on a different website. Can we get them here? We can. Cool. Alright. Okay, okay. So, the over 2.5 rounds is set at 1.54. So the bookies think there's a really good chance this fight's going deep. So the main line seems to be over 3.5 rounds. So I wouldn't touch that. I'm not getting involved in that. I would not bet the over-under on this fight. I don't have a strong enough opinion on it. I'm only saying that because I think you can build very strong cases for the fight either go into a decision or ending inside the distance. Let me explain. I could see the fight go into a decision because they're both tough and they're both very well rounded. So when you've got two tough guys that are both very well rounded, both very well matched everywhere, it's going to be difficult for either of them to get the other one out of there. So you can build a case around this fight going to a decision. However, there are also two major ways. I don't mean to give you this offensive sign. I'll say two. Two major ways this fight could end inside the distance. The first would be, remember we said earlier in the breakdown how Volk has been wobbled, dropped or knocked out in his last 3 consecutive fights. So maybe his chin is going. Now he's facing one of the most dangerous strikers in the division in Topuria. So maybe Topuria knocks him out. The other way this fight could end inside the distance is, say for example, Topuria's gas tank, if you make him work hard, is actually trash. And maybe Volk puts it on him from the first minute, makes him work really hard, and then Topuria becomes too tired to defend himself and Volk stops him like in the 3rd round, maybe late in the 2nd round or something. That's another way in which, you know, this fight could end inside the distance. So there's 2 different ways it could go, and I wouldn't be too comfortable predicting either outcome. I'm not too sure which way it's likely to go. I think the most likely outcome is Volkanovski by decision, just outworking Topuria over the 5 rounds, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so I wouldn't touch that personally. But if you do want to sprinkle a little bit of money to make watching the fight more interesting, you want to take a prop, I think Volk's the most likely one. What's Topuria by knockout or TKO, just out of interest? Best fight odds are broken today. Should we have a look on here? Where are we? Man, it is a struggle. Oh, here we go. Topuria by knockout or TKO 4.50 plus 350. Those odds aren't great either. Yeah, so I would give that a miss. It's nothing too interesting for me there. Yeah, I would pass on that. Let me know how you feel about this fight, though. It's a dead interesting one. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It would help me a lot to grow the channel. I really, really appreciate it. Before we get into this next one, which is going to be Robert Whittaker against Paulo the Eraser Costa. Is that a new nickname? I haven't heard him call himself the Eraser before. Very interesting nickname. Anyway, let's get into it. So we can see that Robert Whittaker is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.40, which is going to be minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. And we can see that his odds are also declining a lot this week, which is very, very interesting to me. We can see that Costa is the underdog at average odds of around 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Robert Whittaker is 33 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73.5-inch reach, and Paulo Costa is 32 years old, 6 foot 1 with a 72-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, nothing too major there, but we do have to point out the fact that Costa unfortunately has a really bad case of T-Rex arms, because 72-inch reach when you're 6 foot 1, that's a bit of an issue. So he is a dinosaur in the worst kind of way, but he's also ferocious, right? He is a bit of a raptor, so, you know, there you go. He kind of makes up for it with his ferocity. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, I am quite surprised by the odds on this fight. I was talking about how Volkanovski was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on the card. Paulo Costa was another one, only because I think Whittaker is one of these guys that is potentially on quite a steep decline, in the sense that we've seen him in so many wars over the years. He's had so many bad injuries. He's taken so much damage. I mean, think of the title fights that he's had. Guys like Yoel Romero, the wars that he's been in. I just think even though he's not particularly old for a middleweight, he does have a lot of miles on the clock. And I always use the example of cars where, you know, if you've got a, you know, 1-year-old car with 100,000 miles on the clock, it's probably going to be less reliable than a 10-year-old car with 1,000 miles on the clock, just because the 1-year-old car has obviously had a lot more wear and tear on the components, the engine, and, you know, it has a lot more miles on the clock, right? It's kind of the same with fighters. For 33 years old, Whittaker's not an old middleweight, but his body's been destroyed by, you know, all the years of competing at such a high level, such a great champion. And I do think we're starting to see him decline. He's not as aggressive as he used to be. Certainly not as durable as he used to be. No disrespect to Dricus du Plessis, but you know, in the du Plessis fight, Whittaker kind of fell apart very quickly. When I don't feel we would have seen Whittaker fall apart as easily as he did against du Plessis, going back 3-4 years. And so for me, what I'm seeing in Whittaker these days is that he's just not as resilient as he used to be. Probably because his body, his brain can't take as much damage as he used to be, which is a problem for a guy like Robert Whittaker, who basically built a career off toughness, if we're being brutally honest, right? Whittaker was a guy that could go hard for 5 rounds, was an absolute dog, had that warrior spirit, and could just keep going, keep pushing for the full 25 minutes, and he would bet on his chin, his toughness, his work rate against yours, and for the most part break guys in the octagon because of how tough he was. But unfortunately, when you have that kind of style where you rely so much on your toughness and your durability, I don't want to say you have a short career, but you can't fight like that forever. And even though in the last few years we've seen Whittaker evolve to be, you know, to fight a lot safer and smarter than he did when he was on his title run, I do think because he's fighting safer and smarter now, he's not as difficult an opponent to face. He's not as big of a challenge as he once was, and certainly not as durable as he used to be. You know, there was a time where Whittaker, you know, he was the kind of guy you'd have to practically kill in order to finish. And then against du Plessis, he capitulated pretty quickly and pretty easily, in my opinion. So that's not good, because once the fighter is kind of dipped and is on that downward trajectory, it's very difficult for them to turn things around, get their career back on track. And the problem for someone like Whittaker, when you may not be as durable or as resilient as you once were, you know, when you're coming in, you're facing someone like, you know, Costa, who's very aggressive, very dangerous. Everything that he throws is to try and kill you. Against someone like Costa, you really have to fight the perfect fight, because the probability of Costa landing some bombs in 15 minutes is quite high. And I don't have that much faith in Whittaker being able to fight through a lot of adversity anymore based on how he capitulated against Dricus du Plessis. And so it's an interesting fight, and I'm quite surprised that Whittaker is such a big favourite. I'm very tempted to bet Paulo Costa. It would be risky to bet him. You know, Whittaker, former world champion, very, very high level fighter, but obviously is a big underdog. Costa doesn't give you a bad risk to reward ratio here. In terms of how they match up from a stylistic point of view, obviously Whittaker's a decent wrestler. Paulo Costa's got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Neither guy ever really tries to take their opponents down. Over the last few years, we've seen Whittaker implement, you know, the odd takedown here and there in fights, but it's quite rare that Whittaker will try to take his opponents down. You know, he shot a takedown against Topuria and stuff. He'll shoot the odd takedown here and there, but for the most part, Whittaker will stand and strike. Costa will stand and strike. If we do see any grappling in this fight, I think it'll be Whittaker trying to take Costa down. Maybe if Whittaker gets hurt and he tries to alleviate pressure he's under with a cheeky reactive double leg, or if he uses a takedown to try and put his stamp on a round like he did against Marvin Vettori. But, you know, Whittaker's takedown defense is incredible. Costa's offensive wrestling isn't good enough to get Whittaker down. So I don't see this fight going to the ground, but if it does, it's probably going to be a cheeky reactive double leg from Whittaker. And to be fair, Costa's quite weak off his back. So, you know, if Whittaker were to use a grappling heavy game plan in this fight, which I don't think he's going to, but if he were to, I think he would have quite a lot of success with it. Particularly because Costa is also a guy that has been known to slow down a lot as fights wear on. But to be fair to Costa, he's very good at catching second wins. He's very good at pushing through and continuing to fight when he gets tired. And his cardio isn't as bad as it was in his early days of the UFC. You know, we've seen him in some wars against Joel Romero, most recently against Luke Rockhold. Even though he definitely slowed in those fights, his cardio was notably better for me in the Rockhold fight than it was in some of his previous fights, which have gone deep. What could also help Costa's cardio in this fight is that Whittaker doesn't fight at a particularly high pace anymore. So Whittaker these days is one of these guys that is quite happy to kind of bounce around, counter strike and point fight. He's not going to aggressively take the fight to you, push a high pace, force you to work. And because of that, similar to Topuria against Josh Emmett, Paulo Costa's probably going to be able to dictate the pace here, and as a result, fight at a relatively comfortable pace for himself. So I wouldn't expect to see Costa slow down all that much in this one. He will be a little bit sloppier in round 3, but unless like this fight's contest at an insane pace, which it shouldn't be based on Whittaker's fights over the last 2-3 years, I think Costa will be pretty comfortable. In terms of how these two match up on the feet, because this is expected to be a stand-up fight, we'll see Robert Whittaker bouncing around on the outside, and he'll be looking to kind of stay out of a range where Costa can land on him, but sting Costa with counters. So as Costa comes forward, Whittaker is going to be looking to sting him with a counter and then get on his bike and circle away back out of danger. Costa likes to pressure his opponents. He likes to come forward, put a lot of pressure on them, force him to fight on the outside. That shouldn't bother Whittaker too much. Whittaker likes to counter strike. He's got good footwork, good movement, and obviously Whittaker's got a lot of power in his hands, so it's going to be a lot harder for Costa to come forward and pressure someone like Whittaker than it would be to come forward and pressure someone like Rockhold, because Rockhold doesn't really have much power in his hands, and Rockhold also has a kick-based style of striking. So it's very difficult for guys like Rockhold that have kick-based styles of striking to back up pressure fighters. It's a lot easier for guys like Whittaker that have really good hands to kind of back you up. And so it's not going to be easy for Costa to apply the kind of relentless pressure that he does against Whittaker, because he'll have to put himself in so much danger and so much risk of being knocked out if he does that. Having said that, you know, we could see a much less aggressive version of Costa because of that. However, he was very aggressive against Israel Adesanya, so you never know. I mean, it cost him. He obviously got stopped in round 2, but you know, maybe he will have learned from it and fight a little bit more cautious this weekend against Robert Whittaker. Now, the reason why I'm very tempted to bet Paulo Costa in this fight is because he does land very huge, very damaging, very impactful shots, which have fight-ending capabilities. He's not the best boxer, he's not the most dangerous power puncher, but his body kicks, which can be turned into, you know, head kicks, they are devastating. Like, Costa generates so much power on his kicks. It's one of those things where, you know, he's the kind of guy that when he throws kicks, you wince because of how much impact they have on them. And just thinking about Whittaker at the stage in the career he's at, where I don't feel he's as durable or resilient as he used to be. You know, we've seen Whittaker blow his knees out in multiple fights in the past. We know he's got chronic knee injuries. We saw him blow out his ACL against Joel Romero. If Costa starts hammering Whittaker's legs with those leg kicks, I just don't think Whittaker has got the mentality or resilience to push through and just fight through it like he did in the past. You know, if Costa folds in with a body kick or catches him with a big head kick, I just don't... What I'm trying to say is I just don't think it would take much to get Whittaker out of there these days based on that Duplessis performance. And Costa is an absolute dog that drags people into wars. It's just what he does. He comes forward, doesn't mind taking a shot to give a shot, puts guys under a lot of pressure and just makes the fight ugly. He comes forward, hammers them with kicks, baits them into big exchanges. And for me, even though they're both roughly the same age, they're very much at different stages in their career, where Whittaker's been there, done it all, got the belt, worn the t-shirt, he's a future Hall of Famer. But he's now on that come down where maybe all the wars have taken its toll on him, and Costa's that young, hungry, up-and-coming bull who's dangerous and physically imposing and explosive and athletic and powerful. And for me, momentum is kind of on Costa's side here, even if Whittaker's got the history and legacy behind him. So I am very interested in betting Costa this weekend. I haven't made my mind up on whether I'm going to yet. I think this is going to be one of those fights where I give it a few days thought, and then I will research it a second time. Once I've researched this whole card, I've still got like 4 fights left to do. I will then sit down cold light a day with a nice cup of tea and a cake, and I'll just watch Costa and Whittaker again and make my mind up on it. And there's no rush really, because Costa's odds are improving. I know I definitely won't be betting Whittaker, but Costa is a very, very, very interesting bet to me, because I just see there being more upside with Costa, not only because of his odds. You take the odds out of it, I just think with USADA out of the picture now, you know, the fact that he's been relatively inactive over the last few years, you know, we haven't seen him for over a year now, since August 2022. There's a potential that Costa, with no USADA, with all that time on the sidelines, that he could have made big improvements. Whereas with Whittaker, I'm pretty sure now he's on a decline, and every time we see him, he's going to get slightly worse. So I don't think Costa gives us a bad risk to reward ratio at underdog odds. But let me know what you think in the Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's definitely a gamble to bet on Costa. It's dangerous to count guys like Whittaker out. I'm not counting him out. I fully respect him. He's a beast and a legend of the sport. But yeah, Costa at big dog odds, pretty interesting to me, because I just think he can hurt Whittaker in this fight. Probably more so than Duplessis. You know, Duplessis really just stung him with a jab and then it was over. And outside of that, Whittaker wasn't really in any trouble against Duplessis prior to that takedown at the end of round 1, whereas Costa can really put it on Whittaker and hurt him for the full 15 minutes. So let me know what you think, boys. Let me know what you think. Should I... And ladies, the one lady that probably watches the channel, should I bet Costa? Should I not? Let me know what you think. And I will obviously let you know in the Discord if I decide to pull the trigger on Borraquinha, or the artist formerly known as Borraquinha. He now calls himself the Eraser. Maybe the Eraser is English for Borraquinha. Maybe Borraquinha is the Portuguese word for a re-eraser. I doubt it. Anyway, in terms of the over-under on this one, is set in the even money odds range, similar to the main event. I'm very torn on the over-under. I don't have a strong opinion on it, only because you can build really strong cases for the fight ending inside the distance and going the distance. The reason being, if we think about everything that I've just said, could easily see a situation where Costa comes out super aggressive, hurts Whittaker at some stage in the fight, and Whittaker's just not durable and resilient enough to fight through it anymore, and that could be a way the fight ends inside the distance. Another way it could end inside the distance is exactly what we said about Costa's approach to the Izzy fight, where he didn't respect Izzy, came forward, put a load of pressure on Izzy, took control of the centre of the octagon, and just basically got lit up from the outside by a superior striker, was eventually stopped in round 2. Could easily see that happening, because Whittaker's an excellent striker with great footwork, great movement, great counter punching. Costa comes out, puts a lot of pressure on Whittaker. Could easily see him eating a bomb from the outside, getting himself knocked out. So that's another way the fight could end inside the distance. But the fight could also go to a decision, because we've spoken so much about Whittaker's evolution into a safer and smarter fighter, where these days, instead of getting into these big crazy wars and these big exchanges, Whittaker looks to use his world-class footwork and movement to just kind of stay on the outside and just move around and counter-strike you from the outside. So we could easily see a situation where Costa kind of comes after Whittaker aggressively for 3 rounds and tries to force Whittaker into these big exchanges, and Whittaker just doesn't play that game. He gets on his bike, circles away from Costa, and just chips away at him on the outside with leg kicks and jabs, and just wins like a nice safe decision, right? A nice safe point fighting decision where he didn't need to put himself in too much danger. And that would be a way in which the fight could go the distance, because both these guys are very tough. You know, at their core, I know I've spoken about Whittaker being a lot less resilient than he used to be, but he's still tough as nails, right? Costa, very, very tough as well. We've seen him in some wars. So, because there's two, you know, real strong narratives that could see this fight ending inside the distance or not. I'm not feeling too strongly about the over-under on this one. The two most likely outcomes in this fight, I believe, are Whittaker by decision. I'd be surprised if Whittaker finished Costa. It's not to say that he can't, it's just that these days Whittaker is a lot less aggressive than he used to be. I don't feel he has that killer instinct anymore with how tough Costa is. I think it's quite likely Whittaker wins a decision. If he's going to win by decision, if he's going to win the fight, it's more likely going to be by decision. The odds are absolutely terrible though. You know, even money, plus 100 territory. Those are very, very steep odds when you think about all the different ways this fight could go. So I think the best value prop is Costa by knockout or TKO at like 4.50 plus 350. Again, I don't love the odds because of how tough and durable Whittaker is, and the fact that his odds to win by knockout or TKO aren't that much better than his money line odds. But if you're a crazy gambler that just loves betting props, Costa by knockout or TKO is not bad, but I would just say to you, if you're going to bet that, why not just bet money line instead and take on a lot less risk. Other props, maybe Whittaker in round 3, just based on the fact that when you've got bets in this odds range, you don't need to win many of them doing a long-term profit, and Costa has been known to slow down in fights. So if Costa does come out the gate real hard in round 1, getting the big exchanges, there's a chance he could adrenaline dump, slow down a lot, and then Whittaker could get him out of there in round 3. But I don't love that prop because, like I say, Whittaker doesn't really have that killer instinct anymore. Maybe Costa can bring it out of him. Maybe it'll return for this fight, but I don't feel it's a particularly likely outcome. It's just something for you prop bettors to think about. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and hit the like button if you haven't already. Please subscribe, I would appreciate it a lot. Now let's break down the next fight on this card between Garry and Neal. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Garry is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around, call it 1.43, which is going to be minus 233 for an implied probability of 70%. We take a look at the odds on Neal. He's around an average of 2.85, which is going to be plus 185 for an implied probability of 35%. So Garry is 26 years old, 6'3", with a 74-inch reach, and Neal is 33 years old, 5'11", with a 75-inch reach. And one thing I find really interesting about this matchup is that when you watch footage of these two, or if you like visualize Neal and Garry in your mind right now, you'll have this vision of Garry being this long, tall fighter that is very good at using his length and chipping away at his opponents from behind, you know, long range finding kicks and straight punches, and Neal being like this compact, muscular, boxing based style of fighter with a very traditional boxing style. But what's interesting is, you know, Neal's actually the guy with the reach advantage. I mean, it's only an inch, it doesn't really mean anything, but it does mean that Garry will perhaps find it more difficult to use his length against Neal than he has done against some of his past opponents. So just found that quite interesting, because Neal's boxing is very good and he's very good at fighting on the inside. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, we know they're both primarily strikers, and neither of them ever try and take their opponents down. It's very rare that you'll see either of these guys shoot a takedown. So I don't expect there to be any grappling in this fight, because even if one of them were to get pretty hurt and try to take the other one down, they both have real good takedown defense, really good balance. They're both very athletic, so I don't think the hurt, desperate fighter would have much success with, you know, a takedown. And so this is very, very likely to be a stand-up fight, and I would be very surprised if the fight were to go any other way. Now, we've already spoken about the styles of both guys, where Garry, long, tall, rangy striker, Neal, much more of a traditional boxer. Don't get me wrong, Neal can kick, he's got big kicks, but for the most part, boxing is his strong suit. And it's a real interesting clash of styles, because for me, Garry is the more diverse striker, where he throws a more diverse range of strikes. He's very good at reading his opponents, whereas Geoff Neal has got that compact, very, very boxing-based style of striking, where he only has that one style one style of striking that he looks to execute, where he's in that traditional style and he just looks to get into the pocket and win exchanges, but he's very, very effective with it. Geoff Neal's got really fast hands, true legit knockout power in his strikes. Garry's very, very good at using his length. He's very, very elusive, but he can be dragged into exchanges. He will also bet on his chin, his speed, his movement against his opponents. So the way that I see this matchup playing out from a stylistic point of view is you're going to see Ian Garry on the outside using his length to basically jab and leg kick Geoff Neal to death. And Geoff Neal's going to let him have that. He's not going to be bothered about it. You'll see Geoff Neal behind the high boxing guard, bobbing and weaving, looking to come forward and get into boxing range. Now, when they get into boxing range, for me, Neal has quite a big advantage, because while he's big and muscular and a big power puncher, you know, he calls himself Hands of Steel. He's also given himself a little bit of disservice with that nickname, because steel indicates really heavy, clunky hands, right? Neal's actually lightning fast, and this makes him very, very dangerous in boxing range. He's got an extremely fast jab and extremely fast counters, and Neal is going to be far quicker, far more dangerous in boxing range than anyone else that Ian Garry has ever faced. You know, we saw Ian Garry get dropped by Keenan Song, which is really interesting because Keenan Song's fighting style and body type is very similar to Geoff Neal's. If we bring Keenan Song up, we can see that he's 6 foot tall with a 71-inch reach, so about the same size as Neal with a slightly shorter reach. But he basically caught Ian Garry in boxing range with a left hook, which dropped Garry bad. Like, Garry was able to recover, but he was dropped real bad. And the reason why he was able to drop Garry was because Garry was very comfortable. He was kind of styling on Song. He was chipping away at him with the jab, you know, landing the odd leg kick here and there. And then Garry sat down on one of his shots to basically land a big right hand on Song. And Song just caught him with a left hook and dropped him. So Garry's one of these guys that has got great footwork, great movement, and he will chip away at you from a safe distance and use his length very well. But from time to time, he's going to want to look to take you out with a big knockout shot, get into that boxing range, and that's where he's very vulnerable, particularly against someone as fast and technical as Geoff Neal. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? Well, it means that it's going to be a difficult fight for Geoff Neal to win, in the sense that Garry will be able to rack up volume on him. I think Garry will be able to do a pretty good job of using his footwork and movement to chip away at Neal and rack up points. But I feel Neal will be the guy landing the harder, more impactful shots, and there will be extreme danger for Ian Garry when these two exchange. And I don't think that Ian Garry can go 15 minutes without Neal pressuring himself into a range where they're going to have to exchange big. Also, Ian Garry seems like the kind of fighter that has quite a big ego. Now, everyone's got different opinions on Garry. He's not a particularly popular guy, but he's talked a lot of shit. Talked a big game, and has been quite mean to Geoff Neal in the long build up to this fight, right? So, what I will say, in all my years of watching the, and this is a big pay-per-view card this weekend, and what I can tell you is, you are, in fact, you're not more likely to see crazy shit happen on big pay-per-views. You're actually very likely to see crazy shit happen on big pay-per-views. It's one of the main reasons why we love the sport. If crazy shit is going to happen, it's going to happen on big pay-per-views. And I think the reason why we see so much crazy shit happen on big pay-per-views is because On big pay-per-views, the fighters are dealing with much more pressure, much more performance anxiety than usual. And when you've got a lot of pressure and a lot of performance anxiety to deal with, you're much more prone to making mistakes. You're much more prone to breaking mentally. You're much more prone to doing something stupid, right? And so if you think about the build-up to this fight for Ian Garry, the entire MMA community has turned on him. In fact, I don't think it's fair to say they turned on him. I don't think they were ever on his side. So the entire MMA community is against Ian Garry. He's talked a lot of shit. He's been really mean to Jeff Neal. He's definitely coming into this matchup as the villain. And so there's a lot of pressure on this guy's shoulders. A lot of pressure. And he's only 13-0. And this is a big step up in competition for him. He's not faced anyone anywhere near as dangerous as Jeff Neal. Jeff Neal is mean, he's nasty, he's aggressive, he hits hard, he's tough, he's durable, he's got great cardio, he's been in a lot of wars. And you know what else? He's kind of got nothing to lose in this fight. All the pressure is on Ian Garry. Don't get me wrong, Jeff Neal is under pressure. He needs the win bonus. He's a career fighter, he's a prize fighter, it's his career. Of course he wants to win. Of course there's pressure on Jeff Neal. But he's probably going to have the crowd behind him. And he's got nowhere near as much pressure on him as Ian Garry does. And sometimes pressure makes diamonds. Maybe Ian Garry goes out there, looks absolutely fantastic, cuts another cheesy WWE promo, and tells all the fucking haters to go fuck themselves, and maybe picks his missus up and kisses her in the octagon. And it's all happy days, right? Maybe Garry proves everyone wrong that talk shit about him. Maybe he silences all the critics. So, because sometimes pressure makes diamonds, and Garry's very good. But sometimes pressure breaks people as well. And as if a cage fight to the death against someone as dangerous as Neal isn't difficult enough, now Garry's heaped all that extra pressure on himself. And he's only human, man. So he's going to be feeling it. I absolutely guarantee that. No matter what he says in the interviews or in press conferences, he's going to be feeling the pressure this weekend. So that's something to think about. So how do I see this fight from a betting point of view? What would I do from a betting point of view? For me personally, I'm not interested in betting either guy in this fight, just because I don't see either of them as having huge advantages over the other. If I'm going to place pre-fight bets, I want to overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour, and I don't see either guy as having huge advantages over their opponent. I think both are very capable of winning. For that reason, this is a dog or pass fight. You'd have to be crazy to bet Ian Garry as a big favourite. If you really, really want to bet this fight, you have to take Jeff Neal. However, I think it's going to be difficult for Neal to win a decision, because I do think Garry is more than capable of kind of outpointing him and using his length to chip away at him. So this is dog or pass, Jeff Neal or pass. I'm not going to be betting him myself. I'm far more interested in Paulo Costa. But Neal, definitely interesting to me. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, again, best fight odds is broke because we don't have it there. Let's go over to this website instead. Let's bring up this. There we go. Okay, so the over-under is in the even money odds range. So I am very tempted to bet the over here. Obviously, we hit a winning bet on the over on last week's card between Jack Hermanson and Joe Pyfer. I hope you tailed that. I'm very tempted to bet this as well. Very tempted to bet the over, just because both guys are pretty tough. Both guys are durable. They do frequently fight the decisions as well. If you look at Ian Garry's record, he's a bit of a decisionator. He's gone to a decision in 3 of his last 5, but he was, 40 seconds away from going to a decision against Keenan Song as well. So almost went to a decision in 4 of his last 5. If we look at Jeff Neal's record, he frequently goes deeper to a decision as well. So these 3 went to a decision, and then these 2 both ended in round 3, but again, they almost went to a decision. So both these guys frequently go deep in fights because they're both very tough, both very durable, but they're also very technical and good defensively as well. It's not going to be easy to catch either of them. So my lean is on this fight going the distance, and I am tempted to bet the over. I will probably pass though, And the reason why I will probably pass is because when you have fights like this, where there's bad blood, especially if the crowd are like litty as fuck on Saturday night, which good chance they will be, because it's a really, really great card, there is the potential that with so much bad blood, both guys could just think, fuck it, and just go to war. There's the potential for that. I don't think Garry's that kind of guy, if I'm honest. I think he's very technical, very intelligent, does come into fights with good game plans and strategies, but maybe his ego gets the better of him and he decides to go toe-to-toe with Geoff Neal and look to take Neal out. And if he looks to come out and make a statement and knock Geoff Neal out, that means he's going to have to put himself in danger of getting knocked out. And so these two start getting into big exchanges, someone's going to sleep, because they're both very dangerous. If this fight goes the distance, it'll be because Garry uses his footwork and movement to stay on the outside and chip away at Neal from a safe distance. If Garry tries to knock Neal out, someone will get knocked out, because either Garry will get the job done or Neal will land an absolute bomb of a counter and put him away. So, yeah, because of that, dangerous to bet on the over-ender. While Garry is usually very smart and disciplined, I do also think he has a very big ego. I think he's very confident, a little bit cocky, and he may actually believe he's the baddest man in the world and Geoff Neal has absolutely nothing for him. And so he may just come out all guns blazing and get the job done, or come out all guns blazing and pay the ultimate price. We'll soon find out. I think it's more likely the fight will go deep, because I think it's more likely Garry will fight like he usually fights, safe, smart, point fights, but you never know, man. You never know. Why did I close that down when we've got to look at props? So in terms of the props, you know what, the odds on either guy to win by knockout or TKO aren't that great at 4.0 plus 300. What about inside the distance? Sorry, what about Garry by decision? These websites are shocking with the odds this week. There it is. Dreadful odds. Absolutely dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. Do you know what? Actually, there is a decent prop there. Props have been a bit dead on this card so far. I don't bet props. I don't like props. But if you do like betting props, or if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching them more interesting, Neal by decision is actually interesting to me. That is interesting to me at 7.5 plus 650. On the basis that it is possible that Neal could win rounds with knockdowns. He could win rounds by inflicting significant damage, by landing the harder, more impactful shots. He could also win rounds by putting Garry into a defensive shell. So what I mean by that is, where we've talked about Garry kind of chipping away at Neal from the outside with leg kicks and jabs, if Neal starts to win exchanges in boxing range and hurts Garry and gets Garry's respect, Garry will be far more reluctant to exchange and may go into a defensive shell, which is another way that Neal could then win a decision. So those odds are decent actually on Geoff Neal to win by decision. So I hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card between Dvalishvili and Henry Cejudo. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Dvalishvili is the favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Henry Cejudo, we can see that he's around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Dvalishvili was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. So much so that I researched this fight last week because I knew everyone would be on Dvalishvili in this fight. So I was really conscious that his odds would probably decline this week. So I wanted to get the research done before his odds declined so that I could decide whether I was going to bet him or not. And this is one of those fights where there is no doubt that this is a nightmare stylistic matchup for Henry Cejudo. And I absolutely think Dvalishvili will win. There's no doubt about that. This guy is unbelievable. I love him. He's so good to watch. He's got cardio for days. He's tough as nails. He's got relentless grappling. Striking's not the best, but when you're as tough, as durable, when your cardio, your wrestling's as good as it is, you can kind of get away with not having the best striking. Dvalishvili's just a beast, and if he were fighting Sean O'Malley this weekend, I'd be extremely confident that he would win, because I think his wrestling would be far too much for O'Malley to deal with. Now, the problem I have with this fight is not... The problem I have with this fight is not Dvalishvili, it's Dvalishvili's odds. And I know I've got a really boring style of pre-fight betting. It's boring, right? I do pass on a lot of fights. But it's because when I place pre-fight bets, because I place so many bets on football, because live betting the UFC is my bread and butter, I have these different styles of betting with different strategies, and each style of betting serves a different purpose. Pre-fight betting for me, the strategy, the system, my approach to pre-fight betting is to be very patient and only pull the trigger on pre-fight bets when we can overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour and get a really good risk to reward ratio in the odds. And because betting markets are efficient, you're not going to get spots like that pop up very often. You will get them if you're patient, but obviously the vast majority of the time odds on fights are going to be pretty close to accurate, because with so many people betting the fights, the odds are going to be bet down to probably where they should be, right? And so in order to have a pre-fight betting strategy where you only pull the trigger in situations where you're getting an amazing risk to reward ratio, you've got to be really patient and wait for those situations where you found an edge that the majority of people haven't. And look, we do great with that strategy. We printed throughout the whole of 2023 on pre-fight bets. We literally only had one losing month in the whole of 2023 on pre-fight moneyline bets. And someone was saying in my Discord last week that our win rate on over-unders, I'm not sure what the time frame was, over a decent period of time, but over-unders recently, our win rate is like 72%. So our strategy is worth sticking to. And so even though I think Dvalishvili's going to win this, my problems with his odds, right? So we can just use his odds that he was at last week when I researched the matchup. So last week when I researched it last Sunday, I think. And he would have been about 1.52, right? So we can put that in, 1.52. So that gives him an implied probability of 66%. So in order to get a good deal on Dvalishvili here, a good risk to reward ratio, I'd have to give him 70% or more chance of winning this fight. And that's where it gets very difficult, because when I look at footage of Cejudo and Dvalishvili, we know the fight is going to be very difficult for Cejudo. It's a good stylistic matchup for Dvalishvili in many ways. But can I give this guy a better than 70% chance of winning? That's where it gets difficult for me. And when I see the odds on a guy like Dvalishvili declining, I just think a lot of the time it's because people aren't really considering or understanding the risk that they're taking on, and that they're getting a bit of a shitty deal at these odds. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll leave a link to this in the description below. On my website, which is currently under redevelopment, it's a mess. You'll see loads of like stock images and like placeholder content on there at the moment. It's under development, but my implied probability page is finished, and you can come to my website and check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. It just explains what implied probability is and why you should consider it whenever you place a bet. And ultimately, implied probability is just a way to convert odds into the probability that a betting site or a bookie believes something has of winning, right? And I think, you know, the reason why they use odds is just to confuse people. Because if you ask 1,000 MMA fans who they think is going to win this weekend, Henry Cejudo or Merab Dvalishvili, probably 900 or 950 out of the 1,000 would probably say, I think Dvalishvili's going to win. And these are the people that will be going and betting on the sport this weekend, right? They'll be placing parlays, they'll be doing DraftKings, they'll be betting fights. So it's no surprise to see Dvalishvili's odds decline, because they're probably not even thinking about implied probability. But if you went to those same 1,000 MMA fans and asked them if they think Dvalishvili has got a 70% chance or greater of beating Cejudo, then you're probably not going to get 900, 950 people say yes. Then they'll be like, oh, I don't know, you know, I think Dvalishvili will win, but I don't know if, you know, I don't know if I'm that confident in him. And this is why bookies use odds to disguise implied probabilities, because people don't realize that quite often they're getting a pretty shitty deal when they place bets. And so that's my issue with this fight. Do I think Dvalishvili's going to win? Absolutely. Do I think he's going to win 70% or more of the time? That is where it gets dicey for me. And the problem is, in order to be profitable long-term betting fighters in this odds range, you've got to win like 3 out of 4 bets in this odds range to earn like a meaningful long-term profit. And it is very, very difficult to maintain a win rate of 75% on bets in any odds range. Even on bets in, you know, there isn't a fighter there in the odds range I was looking for. Won't take us long to find one. Okay, even in fighters in this odds range, you know, that minus 500, minus 400, 1.2 or 1.25 odds range is not easy to hit a win rate of 75%. Because of how chaotic and unpredictable a sport MMA is. So I just like to keep myself out of trouble by not betting fighters in this odds range unless they have virtually no way to lose. Like I will bet big favourites in MMA, but they need to have virtually no way to lose. And I just don't feel that is the case with Dvalishvili, because as good as Dvalishvili is, he's still facing a world-class opponent this weekend who is very skilled in all areas and capable of competing with Dvalishvili wherever this fight takes place. So, as much as I would love to bet Dvalishvili this weekend, I love Dvalishvili, I just don't love his odds. Let me know what you think. Am I being too anal over this? Am I being too strict? Should I loosen up a bit? Let me know what you think. But the implied probability on this one is tough for me. Let's break it down though. So if we take a look at the tail of the tape, Henry Cejudo is 37 years old, 5'4" with a 67.5-inch reach. Dvalishvili, 33 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. So a couple big X factors in Dvalishvili's favour here. First one being his age. So we can see that Cejudo has just turned 37 years old a few days ago. Happy birthday, Henry. But obviously, we've already spoken about this in the Volkanovski versus Topuria breakdown, where the lighter weight classes in particular are definitely young man's divisions, where fighters in the lighter weight classes, like the bantamweight division, tend to decline earlier in their career because speed, reflexes and athleticism are such a big part of the lighter weight classes, and those are the first things to go as you start to get older. So at 37 years old, Cejudo is an absolute dinosaur. He's ancient for a bantamweight. He's had 19 pro fights. He's been in some wars. He's got a lot of wear and tear on the body. And he's also obviously had a lifetime of high-level competition in wrestling, training for the Olympics, all that kind of thing. Now, to be fair, it's possible that Henry Cejudo is in quite a healthy place coming into this fight, because he's only fought once in the last 4 years. And he's also had a decent break since the last time we saw him. So it's possible that, you know, if he's really looked after himself, he hasn't started to decline yet, because he's taken breaks in his career, and he may have recovered, kept himself in good shape. But at the same time, that inactivity could lead to ring rust, and perhaps it's just kind of hidden and masked a decline that we haven't seen because he hasn't been active. I mean, he looked all right against Sterling, to be fair, but who knows, man. 37 years old for a bantamweight is very rarely a good thing, though, put it that way. There's also a size difference here. Not a massive one on paper, but of course, Cejudo's competed at flyweight. He's small for the division. Dvalishvili is bigger, stronger, more physically imposing. Not as big, strong, and physically imposing as Sterling, who's obviously a massive bantamweight, but Dvalishvili will be bigger and stronger than Cejudo. Another X factor to think about in this one is that we've also seen Dvalishvili's team face Cejudo before. So obviously Cejudo fought Sterling last year, and so Sterling is Dvalishvili's main training partner. So Dvalishvili's coaches, his teams, have already done a training camp for Cejudo. They've already broken him down, analysed him, and they'll know exactly what to expect. So Dvalishvili's camp already has experience beating Henry Cejudo, which I think is another big advantage, big X factor in this fight in Dvalishvili's favour. But another X factor for us to consider, and something that we haven't talked about for a long time in the case of Henry Cejudo, is the fact that this will be a 3-round fight, which is notable to me because most of Henry Cejudo's fights over the last few years have been 5-rounders, and even his fights against guys like Dominic Cruz or TJ Dillashaw or Marlon Moraes, which didn't go the full 5 rounds, they were scheduled for 5 rounds, and so Cejudo would have been putting in training camps for a 5-round fight. This is notable to me because your approach to a 5-round fight is going to be very different to your approach for a 3-round fight. So use Joe Pyfer as an example on the last card. Joe Pyfer came out all guns blazing in the first 2 rounds of the main event against Jack Hermanson, but didn't really have much experience going past the first round. We spoke about that in the breakdown video last week. What happened? Pyfer burnt himself out because he didn't pace himself, and then ran into a lot of trouble in rounds 3, 4, and 5 against Hermanson. Cejudo isn't dumb enough to make that mistake. So when you see Cejudo in 5-rounders, he's obviously pacing himself across those 5 rounds. And not going to necessarily say hold back early, but he's obviously not dumb enough to go real hard early and risk burning himself out. So when you research Henry Cejudo, and he's very tactical and strategic, and he chips away at his opponents, that's because he knows he can't go all guns blazing early on. But now he's in a 3-rounder against Merab Dvalishvili, which means Cejudo can afford to fight much more aggressively than he usually would, because he doesn't have to worry about pacing himself over 25 minutes. Instead, he can kind of condense his exertion down into 15 minutes. And so you could see a much meaner, nastier, more aggressive Henry Cejudo this weekend. Now, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, they're very, very well matched. They're obviously both very high-level grapplers, very high-level MMA grapplers. For me, Cejudo is a far superior striker from a technical point of view. I think he's much more dangerous. I think he's got good knockout power. He's got nasty leg kicks. He lands harder, more impactful shots than Dvalishvili. But Dvalishvili is an absolute buzzsaw. So even though Dvalishvili is not the most technical striker, doesn't really land particularly hard or impactful shots. He kind of just touches you and chips away at you. Dvalishvili's strength is in his work rate. It's very, very difficult to outwork and outpoint Dvalishvili because he never stops throwing. The guy is a machine. So, in terms of how these two match up stylistically, on the feet, Dvalishvili is a nightmare because no matter what you throw at him, he just keeps coming forward. And because he constantly attacks you, even though he's not the most technical, he's always throwing punches and kicks at you. So it's very, very difficult to read him and very, very difficult to settle into a rhythm. And this is the issue with Peter Yan, or in the Peter Yan fight, right? If you look at footage of Dvalishvili, footage of Peter Yan separately, you'd identify that Peter Yan had a huge advantage striking over Dvalishvili. But then when you actually watch Yan and Dvalishvili fight, Dvalishvili outstruck Yan. And the reason why this happened is because Dvalishvili can mix things up so much that you don't know what he's going to do next. You can't read him, because he could throw a head kick at you, or he could drive in on a deep double leg takedown. And because of that, he has a lot of success striking against his opponents, because they can't fully focus on defending themselves on strikes in case he shoots a takedown. And they can't fully focus themselves on defending the takedown, because then he could land headshots. And so they're in this weird half and half position where they don't know what he's going to do. And because he's relentless, they spend a lot of time and a lot of energy reacting to what he's doing and thinking about what he's doing. And that's Dvalishvili's biggest strength. He just overwhelms guys. And so while he might not be the best striker or the best grappler, because he does both at a high pace and commits very hard to both, he's a fucking nightmare. Now, with Cejudo's high-level grappling background, high-level striking, he may cope much better with Dvalishvili's style than Peter Yan did, because obviously Peter Yan's predominantly a striker, so he's going to be very, very worried about the threat of someone like Dvalishvili's takedowns. Cejudo may do a much better job of reading Dvalishvili than Yan did. Therefore, even though Cejudo's not as good of a striker as Peter Yan, he may actually do better on the feet, because perhaps Dvalishvili will find it more difficult to kind of overwhelm Cejudo. So that's one aspect of this fight which is interesting. What's also quite interesting about this fight, though, is that Cejudo's grappling didn't look great against Aljamain Sterling. And I think this is where size comes into play. Obviously, we know we've got weight classes for a reason. We know Aljamain is very strong, very big, very physically imposing. He's got a long reach as well, which makes it easier for him to kind of wrap his arms around his opponent's body and control them. But I do feel Cejudo really struggled in those grappling positions against Cejudo. And that could be a sign that he's declining. It could be a sign that the size of Sterling was too much for Cejudo. It's difficult to say. But obviously, Dvalishvili's not as big or as physically imposing as Sterling is. He's relentless, but he doesn't have that kind of crushing physicality that Sterling does. And I think this is why Dvalishvili's cardio is so great. We always talk about this trade-off. You know, these big, powerful, physically imposing guys often can't fight at a really high pace. And then these guys that can fight at a high pace, like Dvalishvili and Volkanovski, they give up a bit of that physicality and that power. And so, even though Cejudo struggled against Aljamain in grappling positions, he may not struggle against Dvalishvili, because I don't feel Dvalishvili has that physicality that Aljamain does. He's certainly not as big as Aljamain. On top of that, this is a 3-round fight, so Cejudo's going to have more energy in those grappling positions and be able to commit more energy in those grappling positions than he could in a 25-minute fight against Aljamain. So Dvalishvili may not have too much success with his grappling in this fight. And so that comes down to how do these two match up when it comes to striking. And while Cejudo won't be able to match the volume that Dvalishvili throws out there, we have seen Dvalishvili get dinged many times in his career. He was dropped bad and almost stopped in his fight against Marlon Moraes. You know, Peter Yan was just overwhelmed. But we have seen Dvalishvili dinged many times in his career, because he's one of these guys that just looks to come forward, apply relentless pressure and break you with his forward pressure and aggression. And because he pressures you so much, because he forces you to engage so much, he is wide open to counters. And Cejudo does have big power in his hands. He's a dangerous boxer. Another one of Cejudo's weapons, which I feel could cause Dvalishvili some big problems, are his leg kicks. If you go back and watch the Dominic Cruz fight, Dominic Cruz's legs got absolutely destroyed by Cejudo. I mean, you know, I wouldn't have been surprised if Cejudo ended up stopping Dominic Cruz with leg kicks in that fight. They certainly contributed to the finish, but Dominic Cruz's legs were destroyed. And if you think about the difference between Dominic Cruz and Dvalishvili, it's a lot harder to land leg kicks on someone like Dominic Cruz than it is Dvalishvili, because the footwork and the movement of Cruz is much better. It's much more unpredictable. Cruz likes to be all the way outside of a range where he can be hit, or all the way in, whereas for the most part Dvalishvili stood right in front of you. You know, Dominic Cruz is a very high level striker, so he's a lot better at reading his opponent's in terms of striking than someone like Dvalishvili. And yet, despite all these things, Cejudo was still able to absolutely destroy the legs of Dominic Cruz. So when I look at this fight and I'm trying to visualize how it could play out, Dvalishvili is going to put it on Cejudo hard. There's no doubt about that. He's going to try and wear him down, break him with his relentless work rate. But he may find it difficult to have success with his grappling. Cejudo, very, very good MMA grappler, very good defensive wrestling. But I do also think there's a possibility that Dvalishvili might be in a lot of trouble on the feet here, simply because Cejudo might not get overwhelmed as easily as Yan. And so I could see a situation where Cejudo cracks Dvalishvili with big counters, lands the cleaner, harder shots on the feet, and also potentially destroys Dvalishvili's legs with leg kicks. That Dominic Cruz fight is pretty notable to me. So this is one of those matchups where, when I look at it, the most likely outcome is Dvalishvili does to Cejudo what he did to Yan. Comes out the gate super hard, puts a relentless pace on Cejudo that Cejudo just can't match, and just basically overwhelms him with activity. That's the most likely way this plays out. Cejudo's 37 years old. He's small for the division. He's going to be declining. And Dvalishvili, in my opinion, is the best bantamweight in the world. That's most likely how it goes. However, I've described ways in which Cejudo can cause Dvalishvili problems and make this fight competitive. In terms of his ability to leg kick Dvalishvili, catch him with big counters, potentially neutralise the threat of Dvalishvili's grappling. And so when I look at this fight from a betting point of view, and I ask myself the question, does Dvalishvili have a 70% chance of executing his game plan, and does Cejudo only have a 30% chance of winning based on the things he can do to cause Dvalishvili a problem? I honestly feel Cejudo has a better than 30% chance. Like 70% is quite a steep probability. If you're betting someone with an implied probability of 70%, you're basically saying that guy has almost no way to lose. And that just isn't the case here. Cejudo's no joke. And so for that reason, I can't bet this as much as I would like to bet Dvalishvili, and I think he is going to win. Maybe I'm being too strict. Maybe I'm being anal. But we only had one losing month on moneyline bets in the whole of 2023. And I want to do the same in 2024. And the way we're going to do that is by being patient enough to wait for spots where we overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. And it's very difficult to be profitable betting guys in Dvalishvili's odds range. So when we pull the trigger on fighters in that odds range, we need to make sure we are overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. And I wouldn't count Cejudo out in this one. He's too good to be counted out. He's too good. And we talked a lot about the Sterling fight. It's also possible that he struggled against Sterling because he was dealing with ring rust. You know, that was his first fight back in 3 years. So ring rust would have been a very real thing. And he was involved in a competitive fight with the best bantamweight in the world at the time, and pushed him to a split decision. It was a razor close fight. For all we know, now that Cejudo has shaken off that ring rest, he could look a lot better this weekend against Dvalishvili. We just don't know. So that's something to think about. In terms of the over-under, I'd be very surprised if this ended inside the distance. Very, very, very likely this goes to a decision. Let me refocus my camera. Very, very likely this goes to a decision. As you can see, the odds reflect that. Aside from someone getting flash KO'd or injured, I don't see this ending inside the distance. Both guys tough as nails, both well-rounded, both great cardio. This one should go deep. So the odds are terrible on that. In terms of props, Dvalishvili by decision's the most likely outcome. Again, the odds are absolutely terrible. Cejudo by decision, not great. Yeah, props a bit dead on that fight. I would give him a miss. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below or on Discord though. Am I being too harsh? Am I being too strict? Should I just loosen up and think fuck the implied probability and bet Dvalishvili? Let me know what you think. And if you appreciate that breakdown, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is actually one of the most interesting fights on the whole card. It's Anthony Hernandez against Roman Kopylov. So this fight is a good example of why fight research is so important, because this is one of those fights where my perception of how both guys matched up from a stylistic point of view was very different to the reality when I actually went and looked at the footage on this one. So this is one of those situations where I went from thinking that Hernandez could be an amazing bet, and he was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card, to completely changing my opinion to the point where I'm really tempted to bet Roman Kopylov, for the reasons that I will explain as we work through this breakdown. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Anthony Hernandez is a pretty big favourite, and his odds continue to decline. In fact, they've declined quite a lot over the last week. And I'm guessing because a lot of people had the same sort of perception in their mind as to how these two match up stylistically, and have just rushed in and bet Hernandez without actually doing the research on it. Because if you actually research this fight, it's difficult to like Hernandez as a big favourite. And again, I'll explain why. But anyway, he's a 1.14 favourite, which is minus 244 for an implied probability of 71%. We take a look at the odds on Kopylov. He's around an average of 3.0, which is plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Hernandez is 30 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75-inch reach. Kopylov, 32 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, exactly the same size. No real notable X factors on this one, other than the fact that Kopylov's coming into the fight on relatively short notice. Hernandez was originally scheduled to face Aliskerov. But Kopylov's cardio isn't bad, so I think it's going to have a massive impact on this fight. So what I'm going to do is describe how you probably view this fight if you're watching this, and then I'm going to show you some footage to show you what the reality is. So you're probably thinking that Kopylov was taken down and dominated by Albert Duraev and Karl Roberson, and because Hernandez is probably a better MMA grappler than both those guys, that means that Hernandez is going to be able to get this fight to the ground relatively easily and dominate Kopylov on the ground. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen. Definitely not saying that, because Kopylov's ground game has looked really low level and Hernandez is a nightmare on the ground. So it's absolutely possible that Hernandez could come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, take Kopylov down, cause him huge issues on the ground. My problem is with the odds. So with Hernandez commanding an implied probability of 71%, you gotta give him a 75% or chance better of winning this fight, which for me, based on past performances, you absolutely can't do, because I don't think Kopylov's takedown offense is anywhere near as bad as people perceive it to be, and I think Hernandez could have a lot of trouble getting this fight to the ground based on what I've seen. So we'll show you some footage to break down the grappling aspect of this matchup in a moment. But first of all, we can just quickly get through the striking, because that's like the easiest part of this fight to analyse. So if the fight stays standing, Kopylov has a big advantage. Kopylov's one of these guys whose striking is actually improving quite a lot. He's got a really nasty kicking game, and his boxing's got a lot better as well. He's actually developing some pretty nasty knockout power, so he lands hard, nasty, mean, impactful shots. And he's also one of these guys that is very aggressive with it, throws a high volume of strikes, and he's just a very mean, nasty, dangerous striker. Hernandez, his striking is pretty average. He doesn't really have much power in his hands. He's not going to be able to hurt Kopylov on the feet. He's very bad defensively. If this fight stays standing, Kopylov should cause Hernandez a lot of problems. Kopylov should win this fight pretty clear, which is one of the reasons why Kopylov is a very tempting underdog bet. So we know this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup, and if Kopylov keeps the fight standing, he's likely to do very well. If Hernandez can get Kopylov to the ground, Kopylov will for sure be in a lot of trouble. There is no doubt about that. So what we've got to do is try and gauge the probability that Kopylov can get the fight, or Hernandez can get the fight to the ground. So what I want to do is show you a little bit of footage of Kopylov's takedown defense. So there's not really a lot I can show you from the Friend, Ribeiro, Soriano and the Chirico fights. The best clips that I can show you are from his loss against Albert Duraev. Now, Albert Duraev is a guy that slows down a lot as fights wear on, but he's obviously got a base in combat sambo, and he's a pretty good MMA grappler. So what I want to do is show you footage of Kopylov's takedown defense from this fight, and you'll perhaps be surprised at how well it holds up. Obviously he gets taken down and looks dreadful on the ground, but he gets taken down under strange circumstances. So round 1, we just skimmed through it, right? Duraev didn't shoot a takedown. If we go into round 2, this is where things get interesting. So here we go. So now we get to see a bit of Kopylov's takedown defense, and get a knockdown there, but let me just make sure you can see. Yes, you can. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so we just skipped through. We're looking for Kopylov's takedown defense. Okay, so here we go. Here it is. So Duraev shoots a really nice deep double leg takedown here. Boom, very nice. Backs Kopylov up against the cage, shoots the takedown there. So it's a really, really nice timed takedown entry. He's gone nice and deep in on the legs of Kopylov and is in a very good position to complete this takedown with how deep he is on the legs. Kopylov does a really good job getting a nice deep underhook in play here on the left side very early and creating a nice wide base with his legs. So that was an excellently timed takedown entry from Duraev. Really good timing, fast drive in, deep on the legs and hips of Kopylov. A guy like Duraev has a high probability of completing a takedown like that, especially on someone like Roman Kopylov. This tall, long, lean, skinny legs. But yet, Kopylov is able to use that underhook, the overhook on the right side, and that wide base against the cage to stuff the takedown. Very impressive. But then we start to see Duraev use a bit of chain wrestling, gets back in on the legs. Again, Kopylov's got that nice wide base, that underhook on the left side. Duraev transitions to a single leg, but Kopylov's got good balance. Duraev transitions back to the double, but you can see that Kopylov, great balance, very athletic, and there he grabs the cage, right, to stop himself from going down. But his takedown defense was on point. He did everything correct. So then what happens is the ref stops and he's like, yo, you can't grab the cage. And he basically, if you watch this sequence in real time, he basically puts Kopylov and Duraev back in a position where Duraev is back in deep on the legs and hips of Kopylov. But Kopylov's not really concentrating or paying attention. So Duraev literally just picks him up and throws him on the floor. I don't know if, you know, Kopylov didn't understand the referee or what was going on. I can't imagine. English is his first language. So it's a very strange sequence. Just watch it play out. So the ref is like, right, you go there, back in on that position. So Kopylov's not even paying attention here. Like, Kopylov is like, you can see Kopylov's confused. Duraev then literally just picks him up and throws him on the floor. And then that's how he gets the takedown. So it's not like Duraev hits a takedown here. The ref kind of gifts it to him, and we can debate whether or not Duraev would have got the takedown had Kopylov not grabbed the fence. But ultimately, Kopylov's takedown defense was looking pretty damn good until the referee interfered, right? Let's just say that much. And then Duraev goes to mount and just basically butchers Kopylov from top position, just destroys him from top position, which is very much what I expect Hernandez to do if he gets Kopylov to the ground. So Kopylov's awful on the ground, right? But tough enough to hang in there, to be fair. His nose absolutely crushed, all that kind of stuff. We go into round 3. We just skim through. So now the fight has restarted on the feet. So let's get a look at Kopylov's takedown defense. So Duraev Shoots a double leg there. Again, Kopylov, nice wide base against the cage. Underhook on the left side. You see chain wrestling from Duraev. Go into single legs. Kopylov just fighting wrist control. Good balance. Can you see the difference? Like, Kopylov's takedown defense is pretty good. But people's memory of this fight will be that he got dominated on the ground, which he did, but due to referee interference. So then we go back to the middle of the octagon, and both guys are tired by this point. I mean, you can see Kopylov, looks like he's been in a car crash. His face, his nose is absolutely crushed. But even having taken this much damage, takedown defense, still on point. And I know Duraev is tired by this point, but so is Kopylov, and look how damaged he is. Duraev in on a single, but Kopylov's balance is still there. Duraev trying for the ankle pick. And you can just see, man, Kopylov's takedown offense is good. You can just see it. He does all the right stuff. All the right stuff. From a technical point of view, Kopylov's takedown offense on point. And there's one final one. 30 seconds left to go in the fight. And Duraev just Kopylov just sprawls out of it. Actually, gets his own takedown, which is very, very nice. So this performance is really significant for me because it shows that Kopylov has pretty good takedown defense against a really good offensive wrestler in Albert Duraev. And we can debate how much the cage grab influenced the takedown in the second round, whatever. We can talk about that all day. But fundamentally, Kopylov's takedown defense technique is really fucking good. Now, what's interesting about that is that fight took place 2.5 years ago. And if you go and watch the Carl Roberson fight, it's clear that in the 2 years between these two fights, Kopylov had exponentially improved his takedown defense and ground game. So now we're 2.5 years on from his performance against Duraev, and I would imagine that Kopylov has taken another giant leap forward in terms of his takedown defense and ground game. I'd imagine he's a lot better now in 2024 than he was back in 2021, because we've seen his grappling improve between these two fights, and we've seen his striking improve a lot over this period of time as well. So whereas, you know, back in the Carl Roberson fight, he had no takedown defense and no ground game. Then in the Duraev fight, he had no ground game, but his takedown defense was good. Fast forward another 2.5 years, coming into the fight this weekend against Hernandez, we could be in a position where now his takedown defense is very good. And even though he may not be able to match Hernandez's ground game, because Hernandez is pretty nasty on the ground, perhaps now Kopylov's improved to the point where he's pretty good at working his way back up to his feet, and he's not just one of these guys that will just lie there confused, getting dominated. So what's very interesting for me is a lot of people are just assuming that Hernandez is going to be able to get Kopylov to the ground and dominate him. That's a very dangerous assumption to make in this odds range. It's alright to make assumptions when the odds are the other way around. If you've got a feeling about how you think a fight is going to go, and that feeling is relatively likely to play out, and you're getting Kopylov type odds, where you've only got to win, you know, 40% of bets in that odds range over the long term to make a meaningful profit, it's alright to take gambles in that spot. But when you're betting guys in the odds range that Hernandez is in, you have to be absolutely sure of everything, and they have to have virtually no way to lose, because to be profitable placing bets in this odds range, you've got to maintain a long-term win rate of 75%, which is extremely difficult to do on bets in any odds range on a sport like MMA. So we've seen a little bit of Kopylov's takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Hernandez's offensive wrestling. And we can really go to like any fight to really show this. We'll take a look at his last one because, like they say, you're only as good as your last fight. So we'll take a look at his fight against Edmund Shabazian. And Hernandez is one of these guys who, you know, on this card we've spoken about guys like Alexander Volkanovski or Merab Dvalishvili, who aren't that physically imposing or powerful or athletic, but their superpower is that they sacrifice the power and athleticism in return for the ability to just go hard and fight at an insane pace, right? That's what makes guys like Volkanovski and Dvalishvili great. They can go at a pace that most humans can't keep up with. Hernandez has got a bit of that in him, in that he's not particularly powerful or physically imposing or athletic, but his strength is his work rate. And this guy can grapple hard and go hard for 15 minutes, no problem. But when you look at his MMA grappling, when you see him in grappling positions, he's not that physically imposing. And you can kind of see it here. So he shoots a takedown on Edmund Shabazian here. And I'm not sure if you guys will be able to notice this, but it's just, when you watch as much MMA as I do, when you watch thousands of hours of MMA in a year, you just get a feel and a read for guys that are very physically imposing and guys that aren't. So I can tell you right now, Hernandez isn't that physically imposing in grappling positions. It's his work rate and his hustle that gives guys problems. So when you see Hernandez dominating guys on the ground, it's not because he's dragged them to the ground and overpowered them. It's because he's hustled in grappling positions so hard that he's worn them down to the point where they can't defend themselves. But to get to that point, he needs to make them hustle. He needs a hustle. He needs a hustle. He needs a hustle. And he's not particularly great at getting opponents to the ground in that stage of the fight. I mean, just look at how easily Shabazian is using these underhooks to keep Hernandez from getting in on his legs. And think about how much deeper in on Kopylov's legs Duraev was able to get. So I'm only really focusing here on when Hernandez is trying to get takedowns. And you'll just see a real lack of physicality from him in these positions. Again, shoots a takedown in on a single leg, but he just doesn't look that strong here. He's hustling hard for sure, but he's not really... He just doesn't really have that kind of physicality where he's going to find it easy to drag a guy like Kopylov to the ground. I don't know if you were able to see this, but it's just something you get a read on over time. You just maybe have to take my word for it. It's just little positions like this when he, you know, chains into getting deeper down into Shabazian's legs. I mean, he's really deep in on Shabazian's legs here. He should be able to get something going. And yet Shabazian is not really in any danger of having his balance upset. And even when Hernandez drives in really deep, even there, when he's so deep in on the legs of Shabazian, Shabazian's off balance, Hernandez just doesn't have that physicality to upset his balance. But with a guy like with a guy like Hernandez, if he just keeps coming forward doing this for 15 minutes, eventually he's going to wear his opponent down to the point where they just don't have the energy to stuff his takedowns anymore. And that's when he can start to get in on those really deep double legs. The problem with facing a guy like Roman Kopylov is Kopylov's cardio is pretty good. So even if Hernandez spams takedowns for 15 minutes, there's no guarantee that Kopylov is going to wear down in the second half of the fight, which will then make it easier for Hernandez to get the takedown. On top of that, the skill gap is so big between these two on the feet that Roman Kopylov might be able to put Hernandez into a defensive shell just by inflicting damage in striking range. In terms of, if Kopylov's able to really hurt Hernandez on the feet, then you know how in the third round you saw Duraev kind of shoot those desperation takedowns and Kopylov was able to sprawl out of them? You could see a sort of situation where, because Hernandez has taken so much damage on the feet, it's difficult for him to get inside and kind of do this to Kopylov because of how beat up he is and how nervous he is of taking more damage or counters on the way in. And then so when he does shoot, it might come from further outside of Kopylov's range, or he might hesitate a little bit, which will make it easier for Kopylov to see the takedown entries come in and sprawl out of them in the way that he did against Duraev. And you can really even see it here, you know, even in these positions where he's got Shabazian down, and we all know Shabazian's cardio isn't great, right? Even in these positions where he's got Shabazian down, he still doesn't have the physicality to hold Shabazian down. Shabazian still finds it easy to stand back up. Now, with Kopylov, obviously, he hasn't shown an ability to be able to do that. He's looked very, very weak on the ground. So if Hernandez does put him on his back, it could be an absolute death sentence for Kopylov. However, if Kopylov has improved his ability to work his way back up to his feet a bit, this fight could be trouble for Hernandez, because you can see he's giving Shabazian tons of time and space to pop back up here, and his grappling control just isn't great. It's his work rate that's great. He's relentless, like backing on the legs. And now what you notice, now he's able to get Shabazian down way easier at this stage in the fight than he did early in the fight, because now he's worn Shabazian down to the point where Shabazian's too tired to defend himself. But again, Shabazian's able to stand back up. It's just Hernandez's grappling control doesn't instill me with too much confidence. I hope that makes sense to you. So this is one of those matchups where, when you look at how bad Kopylov has looked on the ground against Karl Roberson and also Duraev in that second round, obviously Anthony Hernandez is more likely to win, because we've just seen how hard he can hustle for the takedown. If he gets a couple takedowns in this fight, that's probably going to be enough to win the fight for him. But every fight starts on the feet, and we can't measure how much Kopylov will have improved since we last saw his grappling back in 2021. And on top of that, when we're talking about a guy like Hernandez in the even money odds range, again, you need to win 75% of bets in that odds range to make any kind of meaningful profit. Anything less than that and you're basically going to be breaking even. So for me, in order to bet fighters in this odds range, I need to be supremely confident that they're going to win. And I don't know how anyone could watch the footage that I've just shown you and feel super confident in Hernandez, because I think Kopylov's more than capable of keeping this fight standing. To bet Kopylov will be a gamble, because if Hernandez does get him down, he's in a lot of trouble. But if you look at the odds on this one, for me, it's quite obvious which fighter gives you the better risk to reward ratio. You can either bet Hernandez and, you know, hope that long term you can hit a 75% win rate on bets like this, even though there are pretty significant risk factors to betting him. Or you could bet a guy like Kopylov, who you need, you know, 40% win rate on to make a good profit long term. And he's going to be in a lot of trouble if he gets taken down, but he might have the skills to keep this fight standing and destroy Hernandez on the feet. For me, this is definitely dog or pass. Kopylov's probably too big of a risk for me to bet him, because if I'm going to bet on a fighter, I don't want there to be any significant risk factors, and there is in this matchup, because if he goes to the ground, he's absolutely screwed. But he's certainly a live underdog, and certainly a fighter I'm interested in live betting. It's a very interesting fight. I'm looking forward to it. So if we take a look at the props on this one and the over-under, the over 1.5 rounds is set at 1.65. I am very interested in the over on this fight, because both are very tough, both are very durable. Kopylov showed that even when put in horrendous positions on the ground against Duraev, it's not easy to get him out of there. But I probably will not bet the over, just because whenever you've got a fight where both guys have got extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak, finishes are always reasonably likely, in the sense that if early in the fight Kopylov's takedown offense is bulletproof and Hernandez just cannot get him to the ground, you could start to see Kopylov light Hernandez up on the feet, And if Hernandez has got nowhere to go, nowhere to get the takedown, you could see him in a position where he just gets knocked out because he's not skilled enough to defend himself against Kopilov's pressure on the feet. That isn't that likely to me, because I think Hernandez has got the ability to drive Kopylov into the cage, wear on him in the clinch, which will obviously, you know, mean that he's not at risk of being knocked out. But it's a possibility. On the flip side, we've seen how dangerous Hernandez is on the ground. Seen how bad Kopylov is on the ground. So if Hernandez does get a takedown, he could just maul Kopylov on the ground and get a submission. So because we've got that dynamic, betting on the over is risky, but over 1.5 rounds is tempting on this fight. In terms of the props, so the bookies and the betting public think Hernandez by submission is the most likely outcome. I can obviously see that. He's got a lot of submissions on his record. I was just checking because he does have one win by ground and pound there, which would be a win by knockout or TKO. And the odds are better on knockout or TKO compared to submission, but not by a whole lot. So I would probably give props a miss on that one, actually. Maybe I wouldn't. You know, oh no, the odds are terrible. I was going to say Hernandez in round 3 because he might wear Kopylov down to the point where Kopylov can't defend himself in round 3, but the odds are pretty terrible there. So I'd give that a miss. So I hope you found that breakdown video useful. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to grow this YouTube channel this year. I would love to hit 10,000 subscribers this year. It's probably not going to happen because the growth on my channel is very, very slow. Probably because I babble on about fights for way too long. But if you could hit the like button, it would give me a little boost and maybe get me a bit close to hitting 10k subs this year. I'd really appreciate it. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back next week with another breakdown video. Hope you found these videos useful, and don't forget to check out the description below where you can find out how to get a free trial to my live betting service. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, everyone. Love you all. Nice one, guys. Bye.